Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. And we are so happy to welcome you, the Be Health Empowered family, back this week. You know, we're here every Monday night streaming on YouTube and Facebook. I want to welcome our newbies tonight, our first-time joiners. If you haven't done it yet, please hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube and the like button if you're watching on Facebook. And now that we got that out of the way, you know, we are here every week to make sure that you have the science, the facts, the figures, if need be, to make informed decisions about your health, the health of your family, and the health of your community. We don't deal in speculation. We don't deal in misinformation. As a matter of fact, we debunk those every week. And so thanks for joining us. And we have a lot to cover this week. We know that many of you are here because you heard that we are going to be talking tonight about the Black church. This is actually our second time with the Black church as a topic of this show because, you know, there's so many changes that the Black church has gone through in this pandemic. And now that we're at this point, the question is on the table, can the Black church help us navigate our way out of this pandemic? We're going to be talking about that tonight with our special guest, Reverend Dr. Kendrick Curry and Reverend Dr. Shalita Mira. So stay tuned. We're going to be getting to them very shortly. So, you know, we start out every week with the recap. We basically go over all the highlights that you need to know. And this week, to help me out with that, I have my two wonderful producers, Miss Lila Mays, holding down the West Coast, coming in from LA, and Mr. Wayne Bruce. He's got the East Coast covered right here in the DMV area. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hey.
All right. Well, you know, we have a lot to get to. So what you got this week?
You know, we always start with the numbers, Dr. Mel. This is I'm in a hot spot in Los Angeles. Not funny at all. A couple of weeks ago, they were saying somebody was dying every 6 minutes here in LA. What's it looking like across the country?
Wow. Well, you know, cases have continued to skyrocket. We're over 26.5 million cases of coronavirus in the United States. And as cases go up, you know, unfortunately, we're losing more and more people. So we're at over 452,195 deaths from COVID-19. And some people think that that's actually an undercount.
Wow.
The reason why is because in counties, well, you know, not everybody gets a COVID test. So even if they think that the person died from COVID, it's up to the medical examiner to say, yes, this was a death due to COVID. They're thinking that in Republican-leaning counties that they're actually undercounting it because they're not taking COVID as seriously. So we really think that that death number is not really the true picture. And then, you know, we started last week talking about how many people have been vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine. And it turns out that it's about 31.5 million vaccines that have been given to date. And, you know, President Biden has said that we're trying to shoot for 1 million a day. We actually surpassed that. So we're at 1.35 million vaccines a day. So that's actually all wonderful news. And then the best news of all, best news is that hospitalizations are going down, especially out your way, Lila.
Yep. Good news.
That's good. That's good. So what is the reason hospitalizations are going down? You know?
Yeah, I think it's because we've made it out of that third surge that happened as a result of people traveling over the holidays, reuniting with families, going to holiday parties, despite being asked to stay home. And that led to that huge surge that we saw November, December, January. And unfortunately, you know, a lot of hospitalizations. And now that that peak of cases has gone down, the hospitalizations are now following.
So do you think it's because people are getting their vaccines? Because I know somebody who got their second shot.
I think it's a little bit too early to tell with the vaccines, because you have to wait 2 weeks after your second shot to get immunity. And yes, I am that person who got the second shot just this past week. So I still have about 10 days before I reach, full immunity. And, it was a little rougher than my first shot. I'm not going to lie. So I had a sore arm and I got up in the middle of the night. I took Tylenol. Next day, like around noon, I started getting feverish and achy and chills. And I was basically down for 24 hours. I took Tylenol and Motrin. That helped a lot. But I really wasn't good for anything until the following day, Saturday, around afternoon time. And then ever since then, I've been fine. My arm still aches a little bit, but actually as of today, that's gone too. So, yeah. And, it turns out for people under 55 like myself, that's the usual story. People older, the older you get, the less likely it is that you're going to get those type of side effects. But it's not a reason to not take the second shot. Because that pales in comparison to getting COVID, what I went through.
All right.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you. I'm so glad we have our doctor, our host, our expert on the front line and able to speak in real time about the vaccine. So, Dr. Mel, what's up with these variants? We heard about the one coming out of the UK, and there have been some others. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, well, we've mentioned too that UK variant, but we've also mentioned that South African variant.
Right.
That they're both now here in the United States. Actually, the first case reported in Maryland was just 2 days ago. Wow. So the variants are here, and as we talked about before, that means we have to step up our game. Even though hospitalizations are going down, now that the variants are here, we still have to put the pedal to the metal in terms of our distancing, in terms of our mask wearing. Actually, double masking is now recommended, and not assembling. A good friend called me about, unfortunately her mom died, and she wanted to know, was it okay for 10 people to get together to observe a memorial for her mom? And I said, when was your mom born? And she said, in September. I said, it's probably better to celebrate her in September. Just do a Zoom right now. It'll be much more likely that it'll be safer to get together then, because more people will have been vaccinated by then.
Okay. All right. So the variants are here to stay, right?
Well, they're here, and hopefully the more people that get vaccinated, the less chance that they will have of finding a host in which they can reproduce and live and be happy and spread to other people.
So you got the Moderna vaccine, right?
I did, yes.
But there's a new vaccine around everybody's talking about.
Yeah, that JNJ. So it has not been approved yet, but they've released some preliminary data that people are talking about. And, unlike the Moderna and the Pfizer, where you need 2 doses, with the J&J, you only need 1 dose. So that's why people are excited about it. The other reason is because it doesn't require that heavy, being frozen. It can be just refrigerated. So it'll be easier to store, easier to distribute. It's slightly different than the mechanism of the Moderna and the Pfizer. It uses a virus that's not harmful called the adenovirus. It causes the common cold. And it encloses the coronavirus DNA in that adenovirus. And then that's what they put into your body to spark an immune response. And it's not the entire genome. Yeah, it's not the entire coronavirus DNA. It's just the little piece that's responsible for making the spike protein. So that's the J&J. We're waiting to see if it gets emergency use authorization once they apply, which should be later this month.
Okay. Line, everything
All
is
right.
going down
Well,
out on the West Coast.
Speaking of vaccination, right. So the anti-vaxxers have hit the street and showed up at one of the biggest vaccination sites, the Dodger Stadium. What I'm about to say, the views of the of the producer are not necessarily the views
Of
of
Dr. Mel.
our lovely doctor. But yeah, if they had shown up maybe in another part of town, that might have been a different story. But they had cars backed up. Is that happening across the country?
I haven't heard of it happening anywhere else, but I did hear about that episode in LA, and they were trying to vaccinate seniors
Yes.
who had been waiting in their
Yes.
car the entire time, hours
Yes.
in some cases. And then they were shouting at motorists, jumping in front of them with signs that had misinformation on it, like COVID is no worse than the flu and masks don't work and all kinds of foolishness that we have debunked on this show repeatedly.
Yes.
And so it caused them to have to close down Dodger Stadium. Luckily, they were able to get restarted again about an hour later. But we hope that, people didn't turn around and get discouraged and go home, because that means that AntiVaxxers would have won. And, we definitely want to make sure that that's not the case, because LA is getting crushed by COVID. Just like you talked about, one person dying every 6 minutes. If any place needs vaccines, it's LA and LA County. So let's hope that they're not successful in doing that ever again anywhere.
Okay. We're all caught up. We're all caught up.
Yeah.
That's the week that was.
I think so.
Is that the week that
That's
was?
the week that was.
Okay. I'm just
that's what happened this week. And so, we always move on after the recap to what we've been alluding to, the debunk.
Okay.
Our weekly debunk this week.
Weekly debunk. Stopping misinformation in its tracks.
Lila.
I heard that as long as you build up your immunity, you don't need to take the vaccine. So I'm not taking it.
Really? All caps? Excuse me, Dr. Mel. Is that true?
Well, everybody has a choice as to whether they take the vaccine. I hope everybody chooses to, because this is absolutely not true. Building up your immunity is not a substitute for the vaccine. And let me tell you why. So your immune system has to do three things, basically. It has to neutralize invaders like viruses and bacteria by making antibodies. It cannot overreact to the invader, because that could actually damage your body. And then number three, it has to remember well into the future what that invader looks like. So if it comes up against it again, it can neutralize it immediately. And the success of those things are related to a bunch of factors, not just the kind of strong immune system that we think about. That strong immune system, of course, comes about from the 5 self-health actions that we always talk about: nutrition and getting those micronutrients like vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, probiotics. But it also has to do with sleep, getting enough water, getting enough exercise, managing stressors in our life. So all those things go into making us healthy overall. But when we come up against a virus, especially one like this that we had never seen before, as we've seen, it's been unpredictable. We've still seen children, young people, Broadway dancers get sick and die from COVID-19. So there's so many factors that we are still learning. The other thing too is that overreaction, the cytokine storm. Again, even if you have a strong immune system or a healthy immune system and you come in contact with the virus, we don't know that when you get the disease, your immune system won't overreact. So a vaccine actually takes some of the guesswork out of all of this by giving us a uniform dose of what we are reacting to, which in this case is the viral RNA making the spike protein. So it gives us a uniform dose so that we know, our body knows and can react in a uniform way. It doesn't cause the disease, so there's not a chance of our body overreacting to a full-blown viral invasion. So those are the reasons why it's important to get the vaccine, rather than just relying on building up your immune system and then maybe running into the virus and getting COVID or getting an infection, because we don't know exactly what those factors are that will protect you from getting a serious case. So that's the bottom line. The weekly debunk: get the vaccine. Don't rely just on building up your immune system.
So navy beans and echinacea won't help you out.
So, well, they might help. They might help to modify your response. They may keep you from getting really sick with COVID, but we don't know because there hasn't been enough research done to be 100% sure. We do know, though, that with the vaccine, the ones that are out and approved, they're 94 to 95% safe, and 94 to 95% effective in preventing you from getting COVID-19.
All right. So, Lila, we have debunked and recapped.
We have debunked and recapped. Yeah.
I think we have to hand the show back to Dr. Mill.
Well, thank you all. You were very helpful.
We'll see you later.
We will see you later. And we are going to go into our show for tonight, which is all about the Black church. And, this is the first day of Black History Month, February 1st. And it's important to note that the Black church has always been the backbone and the key to the resilience of the African-American community throughout our history in this country. Some have criticized the church for, quote unquote, making us passive and expecting our rewards in heaven. But others recognize the potent force that the Black church has played in helping us organize to survive the Underground Railroad, the Civil Rights Movement, and giving us the mental and spiritual resilience to survive in a hostile environment that we have experienced ever since 1619, when the first African arrived on these shores. So here we are with COVID-19. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were some churches that struggled with how to close their doors and how to message their congregants about what needed to happen, but they've adapted. And we want to hear tonight how they've adapted, and then how, with the present set of challenges that face us, can the Black church help us continue to move through the pandemic as a community and hopefully even out of the pandemic. So to talk about that, we have two really special guests that I am delighted to welcome. The first is the Reverend Dr. Kendrick Curry, who is senior pastor of Pennsylvania Avenue Baptist Church. I should mention that as well as being a man of God, he is a man of science. He is a trained chemist, and I'm sure he's going to be able to bring that into the discussion somehow. And in DC, his name is really synonymous with faith-inspired community involvement and activism. So welcome, Reverend Curry. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.
And I also want to welcome and introduce Dr. Shalita Mira. She is a Reverend Doctor who is a practicing psychologist as well as pastor of Union African Methodist Episcopal Church in Lake City, Florida. She's a professor of social work, author of multiple books, and also a health advocate for causes like domestic violence and mental health education. So I'm really happy to welcome Dr. Mira tonight. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Mira, for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're going to kick it off because we have a lot to cover. So I just want to start off by asking for each of you, and Dr. Mira, maybe you can go first. From the beginning of the pandemic, what changes has your church had to make? And how have you been doing with those changes and adapting to those changes?
Thank you so much. Changes that we have seen have really been isolated because we're in a rural community. We have had to do service in a new way, which means we are moving from our in-person worship to actually our worship online. But that has also presented some challenges because that means we have had to train our congregants on how to access these online services, how to support them in their homes, for many of them who may be elderly and may not have other support system. So really what we have seen has been the movement from church in the physical building to church right in this building, and making sure that our members still have access to the rich word of God, knowing that wherever they are, God is, and making sure they have the tools necessary to access the word.
And thank you. And Reverend Curry, what would you say for Pennsylvania Avenue Baptist Church?
Well, I think what Dr. Mira said is absolutely positively true. And I capture it like this. The church has left the building. So one of the things that we have to understand is that we had to improvise, adapt, and overcome. We had to learn that we had to make sure that we could connect with those who are part of the church, realizing that wherever the God is, that's where the church really is. And so what we did, we moved to Zoom and other platforms, and we had the opportunity of finding new ways of building community so that it's become something that is very much a part of us. And even going forward, it will continue to be a part of us. We instituted programs by which we would contact those who were part of our congregation who may have been socially isolated, but now they're having more conversation with each other in a day-to-day basis. And so those that didn't FaceTime and Zoom before are now Zooming and FaceTiming and WebExing and doing all sorts of things. And they know about the joy of the Lord because they see the tremendous blessing that technology has brought for us. And we're just giving God praise for all that we have experienced during this time of the pandemic. Yes, it seems like it could be something that causes one to be despondent, but when you find new ways to look at new opportunities, to look at a glass half filled scenario rather than half empty, you can transform the outlook that people have. And that's what we've sought to do. Because I just keep preaching over and over. The church has left the building and we've gone outside deeper into the community to bring about change.
Yeah. So, you mentioned the isolation that people are feeling. What are some of the ways that you, Dr. Mira, may have been addressing some of the unique challenges that COVID has brought up? And I consider those to be isolation, job loss. You're a psychologist, upticks in domestic violence and addiction. What role has the church played, or do you see the church playing in addressing some of those issues? Oh, and I forgot a big one, food insecurity. The fact that people have lost their job and can't afford to even buy food. So where do you see the church weighing in on those issues?
I think it's important to maintain that community. So one of the things that is so rich about the AME Church is we have what's called a class leader system. So we have class leaders who are responsible for checking in with the members every single week to make sure that any issues that our members may be facing, that we are able to not only respond, but respond immediately. We make sure we do that via Zoom platforms. We have our Bible study every week. And because of my unique training, I offer specialized groups to not only the members within my local congregation, but within the community as well, to address issues such as isolation, to address issues such as grief, because we know that life has changed for them. There are some traumatic incidents. There's some exposure to vicarious trauma as well. And so I think making sure that we create that community that our members so need, and reinforcing that with small groups, reinforcing that with an immediate response, developing ways to address food insecurity. So we will do some need-based assessments within our community, and we respond to those. And we try to tailor it to the unique needs of not only the members within our local congregation, but also within our community, because there are a lot of different issues that may all be happening at the same time. So that has to be a multifaceted and multi-layered response.
Absolutely. So, I've seen with a lot of, I've done a lot of events where I've been blessed to talk to a lot of different people. And one of the themes that I've heard often is that, I have faith and God is going to take care of me. I don't really need to worry about the coronavirus. I don't really need to change a whole lot of what I'm doing. That's something that's out there. That ain't got nothing to do with me. I'm a person of faith. I'm covered by the blood. So how do you, in the midst of this pandemic, when you see people dying, you see people getting sick, I'm sure you get calls from your congregants all the time. How do you address that particular perspective?
I guess I'll jump in right here and let you know that when we're dealing with a perspective such as those that are already skeptical, those who find themselves engaged in just reliving history, be it the Tuskegee experiment or Henrietta Lacks or some other part of history, one of the things we have to do is get credible information, trusted messengers before them. And one of the things I think that we've done during this time of COVID is create a lot of partnerships. And one of those great partnerships we have is the Black Coalition Against COVID-19, of which you're a member, Dr. Mel. And that is one of the ways of getting credible information into the community. And one of the ways that we've done that is use the Black Coalition Against COVID, for example, to make sure that we have the webinars and we have the other events that are necessary so that our folk can see that this is something that we need to tend to and take care of, because if we don't, our communities will die. The disproportionate number of Black folk and brown folk who are finding themselves in situations where literally they're dying. And we need to make sure that we have opportunity to reach out and to give them credible information, allow them to ask questions and witness how they can begin to deal with their own understanding of the situation in life now, as opposed to what has happened before. So those are just some of the things I think that we'll be able to do and to deal with as it relates to just the creation of partnerships. And now, how do we go beyond teaching folk just that we need to do more than debunk myths? We need to take action and get tested, now get the vaccine. And the church has a major role with regard to protecting the people.
Tell me what you think that role is in terms of that moving from just giving out information to more serious actions.
Well, if we're going to be really those who believe that every person is created in the image and likeness of God, and that they have worth and value and they should have dignity, then one of the things we need to do is have folk understand that we need to have healthy bodies, strong communities, and be able to move forward so that we can have our progeny move after us and learn from what we are doing right now. And one of the things I think we have to do in this regard is to make sure that we offer the services that are needed. I mentioned earlier, just a few minutes ago, that we engaged in partnerships beyond no end. And when we engage in those partnerships, that's one of the reasons now we can feed over 2,000 folk on one Saturday on each week, because we have partners. We have volunteers that come from across the neighborhood and come together. Likewise, we can have COVID testing at the same time that we're doing the food distribution. And so we're handling insecurities, food insecurities.
Yeah.
We're also handling matters that deal with those things like COVID testing. And soon, prayerfully, we're going to have vaccinations at the same site. So what we're doing is becoming that one-stop shop that the church is supposed to be. The church was there, as you've noted, early on in our history. I go back all the way to the hush arbors in slavery, now even unto the Underground Railroad, even to the moment that we're in right now, to bring about transformation of our people. We are here to help folk and move beyond where we find ourselves just relying on others. We're literally shattering an entitlement mentality and bringing forth that which is inspiring folk to do great things. The last thing I'll say is this: by doing the food distributions, by inspiring hope, and by allowing folk to experience the testing and other things, they said, wow, the church is doing a lot. And I said, well, you can do a lot too. I know folk now that have, because of the church stepping out and doing the things that it's done, now they're writing books. They're engaging in other aspects that are entrepreneurial. They're finding new ways to literally come to the point to say the virus may seem to hold us back, but it will never hold us down.
Right. I call that our Black Church edition was actually the first one that we did.
That's right.
Was around April of last year, right around Easter. And one of the analogies I came up with, I said, we had been inside, I guess, for about a month at that point. And I said, this is like our tomb experience, our 3 days in the tomb. And when we roll back the stone, what are we going to be like? And so I would ask you, Reverend Mira, I got a little something.
Amen.
I asked you, Reverend Mira, so when the stone rolls back from this COVID experience for either your church or the Black church in general, who will emerge? Who are you positioning your church to be when this experience is over? What direction are you going in?
Oh, God's church is going to emerge as the light of God, as we always have. We are going to come out stronger. We are going to be better because we are a resilient people. But I will say that we must understand the multifaceted complexities that COVID has on our congregants and on our communities. Because yes, talking about COVID and the vaccine is one aspect of it, but I'll tell you, Dr. Mel, in my experience, I have seen some other adverse effects of family members who've lost their jobs and the increase of child abuse and domestic violence. Some of the other things that I've seen that are prevalent is we're seeing an increase in suicide and we are seeing an increase in grief. So because the church has always been the cultural womb, it has been the place where social advocacy has occurred. It has been the place where if there's no other place that our congregants in our community can go, they know that they can go to the church and find an answer, because God always has an answer. But we must be aware, right, of how COVID is impacting and changing our communities. And we must make sure that our response is tailored to our citizenry. Because while many of them may not have some of the adverse medical implications of COVID, it does not mean that they won't have the impacts of grief, right? And so if we are going to emerge stronger and more resilient, it is incumbent upon the church to identify what is going on in our communities. And that's going to differ. It's going to differ from a rural community versus an inner city community, right? Because for our rural communities, there really is a limitation in the access of resources. And so as the church, we have to harness our strengths. We have to know who within our church specializes in grief counseling, who within our church specializes in creating those connections with regards to medical care. and we have to harness those. We have to make sure our communities are equipped with information. Because Dr. Mel, I'm going to tell you, one of the things that concerns me is the lack of education and information. And I'm so glad we have forums like this. And I'm so glad we have forums like the AME Church, who has been so instrumental in providing education. Because if we can't give informed consent, we're not looking to follow a leader. We need to know why we're following the leader. Our communities need answers to the complex questions. It's not enough to tell them what to do. We have to make sure they have access to the information so they understand why they are doing. And that's the beautiful thing about Jesus, right? Jesus, when he said, come follow me, right? He told them what they were going to experience on the journey. It's not always going to be easy, right? I'm going to prepare you, but you don't have to worry, because Christ said, I have already overcome the world. So we really have to make sure we stay in tune with our communities, and we have to make sure that we are looking at it holistically and providing a holistic response.
And that's the exact, reason why I wrote my book, Excuse Me, Doctor. It's a book and this show. It's so that people have the chance to get the facts and the information to make decisions for themselves. I don't try to tell people what to do. I try to give them the information, and if they need me to work with them in terms of helping make a decision, I'll do that. But ultimately, the decision is yours, and you just need the facts to be able to do that. So, and one of the points that you brought up is getting to know your community and taking inventory of the individuals that you have to be able to then leverage your expertise to be able to work in the community. And that really implies how important that hyperlocal, what I call hyperlocal emphasis is. Reverend Curry actually forwarded an article to me the other day about how, the hospitals being overwhelmed now and running out of resources to take care of patients is a major issue. And I always have worried about Black and brown people in those situations being at the bottom of the totem pole because of sometimes unconscious bias that healthcare providers might have towards Black and brown people when it's time to allocate resources when they're short like that. Given that there are churches in every community that a hospital is in, what would you say the role of the church is when it comes to helping hospitals avoid bias when they're making those decisions, given that it's an ethical issue?
Well, one of the things that churches have to do, and particularly with those who have parishioners that live in the immediate community around the church, where often there is a hospital, is we have to engage, first of all, in advocacy and help become advocates for those who are in our communities, those who are part of our congregations. Every member of our congregation, we try to have someone that walks alongside them in a discipleship way to become a health advocate. And that's of critical importance in moving forward. I also think we have to have those pastors and leaders go challenge ethically what's happening in regards to the hospital. We need to meet with the hospital leaders and administrators and what have you, and begin to let them know what it is that needs to be considered, because they're thinking from their own perch, from their own box, but they need to really also consider a person-centered, community-centered view of their ethics that then leads them to begin to answer the questions that are needed, so that they just don't try to put enough vaccines in certain folks' arms, but they, for the sake of getting the numbers done, they really look at a situation of more than practicability. They look at a virtue ethics where they want to have some sense of honesty and integrity in the process, and making sure that all folk are covered, and making sure that all folk get exactly what they need, instead of just writing some off. In the article that you mentioned, some folk actually have determined that some folk are not worthy of a vaccine because they're so old and they're hospitalized. They don't need a ventilator. Well, that's not the God that I serve. And it doesn't reflect the ethics that come from the God that I serve. God determines the life and the death of all human beings. And we need to make sure beyond a shadow of a doubt that what we're trying to do is make sure that people are cared for. God loves everybody. Certainly, we ought to love everybody. And that's part of that understanding with regard to the tomb being open afresh and we walking into new life. That's what it's really all about.
Yes, and new roles. And I love that advocacy piece that you mentioned. And speaking of advocacy, I want to make sure that I bring in my producers who are representing the audience in terms of being able to get their questions to us on time. So I want to also remind people to make sure that you're putting your questions into the chat. So do we have any to read?
Yes, we have a few questions. Our first question comes from Kathy Sindos. What can the church do to help make vaccine rates more equitable for people of color?
Reverend Curry, I'm gonna go to you directly on that.
Well, I'm glad that question was raised. One of the things we have to do is fight like you know what, because of the fact that many folk have their operations and ways of doing things that are systemically racist. And we have to be very clear that if we're going to make sure that there's vaccine equity or health equity with regard to vaccines, we have to speak up and speak out. I've been intentionally working with folk here in the District of Columbia so that we can find out exactly what the numbers look like and who's getting the vaccine, whether it be in nursing home, for example, where there are some that you're having a discrepancy between the numbers that are actually given to those who are the residents of the nursing home versus those who are the staff members of the nursing home. So we're dealing with down to those levels so that we can make sure that we get the needles in arms and get the vaccines that are necessary. And we can help those who are definitely considered on the margins and among the most vulnerable receive what they need. And what I'll close by saying is this: every church that is open ought to be able to have an opportunity to be a vaccine station or location so that people will be able to go in their community when the CVS is closed, when the hospitals are not open, and they will be able to go in off hours and go to a trusted place with credible messengers so that they will be able to have more equity. So the question is also on the other side. If we want to do more to get health equity, when health equity comes, we need to show up.
That's right.
Right.
All right. Lila, do you have anything on the West Coast?
Yeah, I do actually. It's from Fort Worth, from my mama. Miss Paige Mays Rice says the psychology of not gathering has taken a toll on she and her husband and community members. And so although they can worship online and they have some small gatherings online as well, like the Reverend Doctor mentioned, are there some creative, safe ways that you all are exploring to get people to be able to worship and gather safely in person?
Dr. Mira?
Okay, yes, ma'am. We try to be very cautious in our response because, of course, safety is always our utmost concern. And so we try to promote social distancing and being able to gather in collaborative and fun ways, because I think that we kind of have one perception of how we can use many of our social media mediums, many of our Zoom mediums, but we can use those for fun and exciting events as well. And so I think that you can create things like reading groups, book groups. You can create activities such as little groups where you may get together and have a girls' night out or a gentleman's night out. If you do feel like you need to meet, it really needs to be in an outdoor space where you can maintain that social distancing. Of course, you want to wear your masks, because I know that some people really thrive with that person-to-person connection. And so I think that if you can create those collaborative experiences, maybe it's something like golfing, right? Where you can be at a space on a golf course where you can maintain that distance but still enjoy each other's company, right? Those are the types of activities. Here we see some local gardening initiatives where everything is spaced out, but they're teaching gardening tools and strategies to many of those individuals who are used to collaborating in those spaces. So we have to get creative. We have to find out those things that we really love and that bring us enjoyment and excitement, and find safe ways to practice those.
And it's probably a little easier to do it in Fort Worth and Lake City than Albany, New York.
Yeah.
At this point in time, to do it in the outdoor space.
So we have a question coming from Susan Smith Cooper. I'm about to be a grandma in July. My daughter lives in Los Angeles and barely comes out of the house these days. Should pregnant women get this vaccine? Apologies if this has been asked before. The answer has a new meaning for us now.
Yeah, that's a great question, Susan. So as far as pregnant women, they were not included in the trial. So that's important to know. However, the OBGYN, the Society of OBGYNs, the doctors that focus on pregnancy, has gotten together and has said that they recommend that pregnant women get vaccinated because the risk to pregnant women of getting COVID-19 way outweighs the concerns about the vaccine in that group of people. As you know, pregnant women are at risk for blood clots, which COVID-19 makes worse. And for those reasons, and also high fever, which can damage the pregnancy and be of harm to the fetus. So for those reasons, it's recommended that pregnant women get vaccinated. I would say that every pregnant woman should have that discussion with their OBGYN and come to a decision together about what's best for them and their baby. Ironically, when I went to get my first shot, when you go to get vaccinated, you have to sit for 15 minutes after the shot so that they can observe you for an allergic reaction, make sure you don't have one. So the person I was sitting closest to, about 8 feet away from, was obviously pregnant. I think she probably has delivered by now. And we just started talking, and she's a dentist. And she said, yeah, I talked with my OBGYN and I felt like this was the safest thing for my pregnancy and for my baby. And the last thing I will say about that is there's a question as to whether the vaccine causes infertility and miscarriages, and that has not been observed at all. As a matter of fact, during the trial, several women, I think about 23, 25 women got pregnant during the trials and sustained a successful pregnancy.
Wow. So I guess that answers that. So we're getting far more statements about what's going on in the community than questions, Dr. Mel. And we have a statement from Marv West. He's in Ohio. Please know that in Ohio, several states, there is a registration list called the Do Not Waste list, so that at the end of the day, if there's any extra vaccine, people on the list can be called to get the extra vaccine. You have to ask to be put on the list. If you can't get on the regular list, this is a alternative.
So I want to speak to that and actually bring Reverend Dr. Curry into this. In DC, there have been a lot of issues with distributing the vaccine, there were issues of computer literacy, especially, having to go online to register for the vaccine. What role do you see the church playing in maybe facilitating people getting onto that? What did Marv West call it? The do not waste list.
Do not waste list.
And being able to coordinate things like that. Is there a role for the church in that?
is more than sure. The church is more than capable of getting into making sure that folk can get on the do not waste list. Those lists do exist in the District of Columbia. Many of them are informal, and they are associated with pharmacies, for example. And in a local neighborhood, a pharmacy may have a do not waste list. And the church can be the first ones who are called, for example, through a virtual health ministry like Dr. Mel, that we have, where we call our members as well as those who are in the community and find out how they're doing and find out what their needs are, and make sure we can sort of they have opportunity to engage in get and find the help that they need. But definitely the church should be responsible for making sure that folk get on those lists. One real example is that there's a grocery store in the neighborhood that has a pharmacy. And one day while they were giving vaccinations, they actually ran out of people with regard to appointments. And so they still had some vaccine available, and they made announcements in the store, and that spread throughout the community and in the store. And you should have seen the people trying to rush to get those particular vaccines before they were wasted. And so, yes, that's absolutely something the church must be involved in, because really pastoral care is care of the soul. And what our churches are engaged in is really caring for the souls of folk. We are tripartite in our being. We're spirit, we're soul, we're body. God needs a healthy body so that we can become the hands and feet of Jesus to help somebody else. So absolutely, positively, the church should be engaged in such work.
Thank you.
We have another question from Cassandra Vaughn. What do you think about the churches that are open and there is no social distancing or mask worn?
Reverend Dr. Mira, does that happen in Florida?
Yes, it does happen in Florida. In fact, if we could be honest, there's only a few of us here in our community that are still worshiping in the virtual manner. At all of our AME churches, at the directive of our bishop, and our elders have commissioned us to remain closed because the safety of our membership is our utmost importance. But you're exactly right. There are many churches. In fact, if I had to be honest, in my rural county, it is quite odd to really see someone even in a store with a mask on. We are the minority that's wearing masks, even in our local stores, restaurants. In our local area, you wouldn't even think that COVID exists in some of these small rural areas because people are really trying to go on with life as normal. So it really is incumbent upon us to continue to educate. We have to continue to educate our communities that COVID is real. Its symptoms has life-altering impacts. And we have to make sure that we continue to practice what creates safe congregations, safe communities. And so we're continuing to worship virtually. We are feeding the souls of our members. And again, reminding them that the doors of the church are always open because we are the church. I think go ahead.
I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious with the change in administration and the mask mandates and executive orders that have been passed. Are you sensing that there is any kind of change in your community in Florida, or is it just sort of still business as usual?
It is still business as usual. In fact, Florida has been very lax on the mask wearing and the social distancing altogether. Our governor really has not followed many of the other states that are leading in trying to combat and reduce the number of cases. So you see Florida is really leading in some of the COVID-19 cases.
Yes.
So again, education, 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 especially for our communities, because we're going out, day to day. You see it. There's no masks. There's no social distancing. So we have to protect ourselves, and we have to make sure to spread in our communities to use those safety measures.
Dr. Mel,
Mm-hmm.
we have.
I'm going to try to get in one more question.
Yes, just one more question. Home testing. This comes from Max Anderson in Atlanta. Home testing kits for COVID are now being created. What's the pros or cons of this?
So I have to say I do have to research that. So thank you, Max Anderson. That's an excellent question. The cons that I can think of off the top of my head is just uniformity in the way that they are administered at home, because if the person who's doing it isn't clear on how to do it, you might get a false sense of security if it comes up negative when you're actually really positive. And then the other thing is reporting. So unless there's some sort of link of the result that automatically, independent of you manually putting it in, automatically triggers the local health department that you're positive, that people may actually hide the fact that they're positive, because of stigma, because of employment, et cetera, et cetera. So those would be the things that I would be the most concerned about in terms of at-home tests. But I do know that they are coming and could be a game changer in a positive way, given that they're a way to close up those gaps around, people not reporting and people not using them properly.
Okay, I think that takes us to the end of this segment.
All right. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you to the producers for those questions. And I really, really want to thank Reverend Dr. Shaleda Mira and Reverend Dr. Kendra Curry. You guys were wonderful to talk with. This has been a very rich conversation. It was so much more that I think we could have covered, but time just has not allowed. I think it's clear, though, that on so many fronts, the African American church can help us deal with the physical needs of the pandemic. The fact that because even though many buildings are closed, those can be used for food distribution, for COVID testing, as Reverend Curry talked about, for even vaccine administration. And as Reverend Mira, the psychologist, talked about how the Black church can assess needs in the neighborhood and especially help to address the mental health challenges that are happening, that are leading to domestic violence, child abuse, addiction, and really doing outreach and forming support groups to do that. And then also advocacy. We heard a lot about the role of advocacy, making sure that people get the resources and supplies that they need, that when they go to the hospital, that they are dealt with ethically and dealt with as if their lives matter. So there's a huge role for the Black church to play. I know the Black church is already playing it in many places. We hope that those churches down in Florida and other parts of the country that are meeting and not wearing masks really understand the role that they're playing in propagating the pandemic and are able to pivot and help us get out of it, because the Black church has always been that foundation, that trusted entity where people go to feel safe, to feel valued, and for the ability to organize to help advance us in society. So I want to once again thank my guests for joining me. And remember, tomorrow morning at 9:35, If you're awake and listening to the radio, you can catch me on the Russ Parr Morning Show, wherever you are in your neck of the woods that it comes on. And I will also be back right here, same station, streaming on YouTube and Facebook next week, 9 p.m. East Coast, 6 p.m. West Coast time. Thank you again to my producers. Thank you, my audience, for those wonderful questions and for tuning in. And until I see you next time, please remember, be wise, be well, and be health empowered. Thank you.